With Marty Biron, Craig Button. Gentlemen, on this day last year, the Leafs were tops in the Atlantic. Now, 2 points out of worst in the division. The Leafs franchise is no stranger to embarrassing times. There was Wafflegate, Salute-gate, and of course, the 18-wheeler off the cliff line from Brian Burke. Marty, we need you to fill in the blank. This Leafs franchise is now in its worst shape since when?
Well, for me, it's Salute-gate, right? Because it's the same disconnect between the organization and the fan base. Like, you know, you're seeing what has happened when it was Salute-gate. We're not going to salute the fans. It was Kessel. It was Dion Phaneuf. Like, they were great players, and they had tons of success. But there was a disconnect about what it is to represent the organization, the team in this city in front of this fan base. And I'm seeing the same thing right now. Over the last week, we've seen that disconnect, right? Your captain doesn't talk to the media Friday after playing Mitch Marner and the Vegas Golden Knights. The Nylander flipping the bird, right? And then you had a 5-game homestand and you gave up 25 goals in those 5 games and you went 0-4-1. Like, that is a tough go for the Leafs. And so I say that there was some tough times that actually led to Austin Matthews getting and whatnot. But Salute-gate was right before that, about 12 years ago, and it was a disconnect between the room, the organization, and the fan base, and I'm seeing the same thing right now.
Yeah, when you put it that way, Marty, I think that that's a really good example, Salute-gate, because right now you have the players that don't seem to be engaged off the ice, unless you want to flip the bird, you call that engaging, or in terms of their media presence and everything that goes with it. And then on the ice, there doesn't seem to be a real significant intensity and purpose to what they're doing. So you combine the on ice to the off ice, and you certainly have a scenario where the disconnect is starting to become stronger and stronger.
So Money Puck does the math and comes up with teams' playoff chances. The Leafs now have a 4% chance of making the playoffs. Craig, who's to blame, and what's the price to be paid here?
Gino, it's too easy to sit here and blame this person or blame that person. We'd have to go back a lot of different years and try to figure out what's going. If you want to play the blame game, go ahead and sit here and play the blame game. I'm not talking about you, Gino. I'm talking about overall. What this organization needs to do is face reality straight on. What are we? What can you do to try to make sure you can move forward and look for solutions? That's the only thing that they should be doing. Keith Pelley should be engaging with his hockey group and hearing what their solutions are. Where do we want to be? You can't just sit there and say, oh, we want to be a Stanley Cup contender. Great, that's a goal. What are your paths? What are your steps to get there? You know, I'm going to use the New England Patriots as an example. They were a standard bearer in the NFL for championship culture, for winning. And then all of a sudden they fell off. And what ended up happening was they didn't just fall off the cliff. They went right down to the bottom. Coming back in, they said, Mike Vrabel, what are you going to do to establish? He didn't try to be Bill Belichick. He played for Bill Belichick. He won. But he said, here's what we're going to have to do, and we got to identify the areas that will strengthen this team. That, to me, is what the Toronto Maple Leafs have to do. Anything else is a waste of energy. They don't have very much in their prospect pool. It's very thin. They don't have draft picks. And if you want to continue down this path, I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're just going to sink deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're going to face it inevitably at some point in time. Reality is staring them right in the face. It's not a playoff team. It's not a Stanley Cup contending team. Yep. You got to look at what you can do. I've used the example of the Boston Bruins last year. The Boston Bruins face reality straight on. And look at where they've gotten to, and they're still going to make steps forward in the years to come. But if you want to hang on and hang on and hang on, inevitably you can't hang on anymore. You lose your grip and you fall real significantly.
Now, that's a very mature answer, and I love that from you, Craig. And I think that, but for me, as a goaltender, it was always like, put the blame on somebody. My defense didn't have this guy. I gave up a bad goal. It wasn't my fault. So I love to put the blame around, but it doesn't mean that it's all on this person. But I look at Brad Treliving, and I'm pretty sure he's sitting in his chair today and he's saying, I've got to be better. I got to put a better roster together. You may want to blame the coach because defensively, they're not playing well. And this coach was supposed to be a defensive-minded coach. But the GM hired the coach, so it falls on the GM again. And the way that you get out of it, what's the price to pay here? for me, I don't want anybody to lose their job over it, but I want to look forward, just like you, Mr. Button, and say, what can you do to get yourself out of it? You can't be a buyer at the deadline. You can't be a seller at the deadline. There's really nothing to buy, and you don't have currency, and there's nothing to sell. So the only door that's open and the only option that's there is to go outside the box and do something big. And what is the price to pay? Well, you started last year by letting Marner go. I think you may have to look at Matthews and Nylander and say, one of them has to go. We have to trade one of them and get a return to be able to move forward. That may be the price to pay because of the direction you went over the last 2-3 seasons, and now it's gotten you here. You don't have depth, you don't have the right players, and you have to make a bold move to be able to start fresh and move forward.
That is a bold comment from you, Marty. I want to follow up on that. If the Leafs ever did get to the point where they were entertaining trade talk about Nylander or Matthews, and we're not saying they are just yet, would they want Brad Treliving still in position to take those calls, or would they want someone else in that seat before even considering that sort of huge move, Marty?
No, I think you want the experience and the background of a guy like Brad Treliving to be able to take the calls. I go back to when Patrick Roy was traded from the Montreal Canadiens. Serge Savard had started to talk about these conversations, right? And moving forward with maybe trading Patrick Roy. But then they fired Serge Savard. They brought in Réjean Houle, and he got fleeced by the Colorado Avalanche. And I don't want that to happen if the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to make that move. So you have to say, this is Brad Treliving's decision moving forward. You make the calls, you make the decision, you bring the best package together. But if you make a change at GM, you're going to end up like the Montreal Canadiens back in 1995-96.
Well, I'm going to say this. I'm not going to say yes, Brad Treliving should stay or Brad Treliving should go. For Keith Pelly, he's got to sit down with his hockey management group led by Brad Treliving. And he's got to hear what the solutions would be. What are the options? What do you think we could do? How does it look? How are we going to proceed? And then you make a determination on if you have the confidence that Brad Treliving can do it. And if you do, then you keep him. If you don't have the confidence that he can do it based on what he's telling you, you move on. And there's lots of experienced guys. The Montreal Canadiens made a mistake by bringing in Réjean Houle. Now, I'm not suggesting you go and bring in somebody that has no management experience here, but for me, Keith Pelly has to hear what hockey management sees as viable solutions. And I don't think you have to be bold either, Marty. The Boston Bruins, yeah, they let Brad Marchand go. Was that bold? He was a pending unrestricted free agent. They traded Brandon Carlo. They traded Charlie Coyle. What they did was, what we have is no longer good enough, and it doesn't meet our standards. And that's where the Toronto Maple Leafs have to go.
Looks like the Leafs have got big problems, and it may require some big moves to pull them out of this.